Welcome to the stable. You're here a little early, but it's okay. In a few hours, it's going to get a little crowded in here. Did anybody having any trouble trying to find the place or get through the roundabout? It's a little narrow, kind of new for some. The street out there, it's a little congested out there with the holiday season, and there's a lot of people in town. Plus we have that census going on to be counted, and seeing as how there's not that many places for visitors to stay, the streets around the inn have been especially full of people recently. So just through this door, in a little bit, the innkeeper's family is going to be busy hurrying about, preparing things for the guests that are arriving, people that want extra towels. How many people have forgotten like your phone charger or toothpaste? Brian? All right, so it's quiet in here right now. The cow and the chickens are out there in the courtyard getting their exercise, and the visitors from Nazareth haven't arrived yet with their donkey. Okay. There's a nice high new window back here that opens to the courtyard, and just one over here that opens to the side street, so you gotta have some fresh air and ventilation every once in a while. But later, if you're looking through this window back here, you might notice a particularly bright light in the sky just over the field outside of town. Over there in the corner are sacks of chicken feed, and not long from now, a very scared husband is going to rearrange those sacks to provide a somewhat comfortable place for his very pregnant wife to sit. She'll end up doing a little bit more than that, if you don't know yet. To the surprise of everyone, and least of all, the innkeeper, she's going to give birth to a baby right here in this room. Now, beside these bags of feed are some bales of hay for the larger animals. And by the time the young couple arrives in a few hours, the innkeeper's son is going to come in, and while the travelers are weary from their journey, he's going to break up those bales of hay, and he's going to set them right here against this piece that's against the wall. And take a good look here. This is the piece, okay? This is the piece that people are going to write songs about. The manger. Just a few rough boards nailed together. It didn't take a great carpenter like Charlie Rail to build this thing, all right? In fact, the innkeeper himself threw this one together with some leftover nails and boards from where they built the extra room a few years ago. But in a few hours, okay, a tired young mother is going to wrap the most important newborn in human history and set him right here so she can get some rest too. Doesn't look like much. Doesn't look like it's ready for such an important task. And heaven knows the city out there isn't prepared. It's in political upheaval. The religion of the Jews it's being used as a weapon by both the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities. The world is not ready. This room was not prepared to be a maternity ward. Mary and Joseph know that something special is about to happen. But even they can't really be ready for what's to come. So, nevertheless, in a few hours, God will be born right here as a baby. Not too long from now, Mary and Joseph will knock on the door out front and ask for a room. The innkeeper will explain, the guests' areas are already full. And Joseph's shoulders will slump. And he'll turn to leave. And there's his exhausted, very pregnant young wife. The innkeeper will see those shoulders droop and the worried looks on the young couple's face. And he'll watch Joseph turn back to him and say, "Isn't there any place we can go and rest?" And then I imagine the innkeeper is going to say one of the most important words in human history. He says, "Yes." Now, this innkeeper has a reputation for turning them away, but the opposite is true here. Though he was fully booked, and the one empty spot wasn't at all prepared, he opened the door. And that's all it took. He wasn't expecting them. He wasn't ready. This stable wasn't prepared for people, but he let them in. And the rest, as they say, is history. We're not so different from that innkeeper, you and I. It's Christmas, and we're busy and stressed. But that's not only true just at Christmas, right? Year-round, it seems like our lives are full, crowded, hectic. But listen closely. One of the many bits of good news of Jesus coming into our world is that he didn't wait for it to be ready. All he asked for was a yes. When the angel appeared to Mary and told her she would have a baby, even though she didn't feel at all prepared, she said yes. When the angel showed up at Joseph's house and he told him, "Go ahead, wed Mary," he said yes. Through our eyes, they were unconventional choices, but God saw something more. Do you think that maybe God saw something more in the innkeeper too? Because when the innkeeper had the opportunity to say, no, he said yes. Jesus doesn't need you to be ready for him. He just wants you to open the door and say yes. I don't know what the unprepared stable looks like in your life, but I know this. Jesus is ready to bring a miracle out of that empty place. The world was changed because the innkeeper said yes, and he opened the door. So what do you think? Can it happen in the world you and I live in? Can it happen in your life? Can it happen in your life? Can it happen in mine? Yes, absolutely, yes.
Well, once again, I'm glad that you're here. Before I go too far, we're going to need candles, and hopefully you grabbed a candle. We're not getting them now. Don't worry about it. Don't start freaking out. But if you don't have one, I was told if you don't have one, you can just raise your hand up, and some of the guys will bring you a candle. So if anybody not have one in the, everyone, anybody at home not have one, because we can not do much for you. Okay, good. Well, like I said, we are in, like has been already said, we're in this Advent season. Advent, if you're not aware of, Advent is the word that means coming or arrival. And these last few weeks, we've been talking about the coming of Jesus. We've looked at various passages in the Christmas narrative and what it teaches us about the nature of God and what it teaches us about the nature of our life and our life with God and what that looks like. But this evening, we come to the birth of Jesus. We come to celebrate the actual birth of Jesus' arrival, the first arrival of Jesus, and we come to understand what it means to us individually, what it means to our life as a community. We've been talking about the gift of God's grace. And what does it look like for God's grace to be gifted to us, and what that teaches us, again, about the nature of the character about God, but also teaches us about our life with Him in His grace that He's gifted to us. We've explored stories of Zechariah and Elizabeth and looked at the promise of answered prayer, the gift of God's grace to answer our prayer. We've looked at the story of Mary and the gift of submitting to God's will in our life. We've looked at Elizabeth and Mary's interaction with each other. We've looked at the gift of grace that comes to us in relationship and how it encourages our hearts and our souls. But like I said, today we come to the actual birth of Jesus. And while the story of Jesus' birth may be familiar to many of us, and we've heard it or we've seen it in various forms throughout the years, this evening I want to look at it and just highlight and maybe just remind us of a couple things that we may be needing to be reminded of, especially in the day and the age that we live in today, to remind us of the character of God, the truth of who God is, and also the truth of who He's inviting us to be as we live in response to Him. So Luke chapter 2 is where we are today. So if you have a Bible with you, Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7 is just a short passage. We'll kind of unpack it. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along the screen behind me or on the sides or on the screen in front of you if you're online. So Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 1 through 7. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. When he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths, placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. As I said, many of us have heard or seen this story played out or heard of it in many different church settings throughout the years. But let me just highlight a couple of truths that we find here that might open us up or reopen us up to the wonder of the gift of God and His grace for us. And the first reminder that I want to remind us of, first truth about the nature of God, is the faithfulness of God. That God is faithful to His promises. We need to be reminded of that, and we see that in the story of Jesus' birth. The census that the Caesar Augustus tells all the Jewish people to go and do. It's the first census that is taken while Quirinius is governor of Syria here. And that census, in case you're wondering, is not a good thing if you're a Hebrew person. Because the census was a reminder to the Hebrews that they were an occupied people, that they weren't people of their own. They didn't have their own government, but that they were persecuted, that they were oppressed, that they were occupied by the Roman government. That they were a people without any power. They were a people without any prestige. They were a people without any political clout. And it was a way for a Caesar or a governor or a Roman emperor to exercise their authority over them, to exude more taxes from them, to remind them that you're not a person of your own, that you are occupied and that you have no power or anything of your own, that you are subordinate to everybody else. So this census that is going to be taken is not something that everybody wanted to comply by. It wasn't something that was like, oh, no big deal, just put your name on a piece of paper and go. No, they had to travel some 75 miles from their home back to Bethlehem. So there's a bit of confusion, there's a bit of anger, there's a bit of resentment to the political powers that be that makes them uproot their families and travel 75 miles to get to Bethlehem. And not only do you have to travel 75 miles, but put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Your wife is bulging at the seams. She is pregnant, ready to give birth. And now you have to travel on foot 75 miles. Why? To comply by this arrogant Caesar who's just flexing his muscles over you to remind you that you have no power, no clout, you have nothing because you are an occupied person. And when you get there, where do you find? There's no guest room. There's no guest room available for you. There's no warm guest room available for you to lay down and let your wife put her feet up or anything. So the levels of frustration, of chaos, of confusion are off the charts when you travel your 75 miles. Why? Why? To satisfy some power trip by a Caesar who wants to remind you that you are nothing to him? And in all that chaos In all the confusion, in all the frustration, Luke is a master storyteller. For that is what's happening on the surface. On the surface, there's a census that needs to be taken, and they have to travel 75 miles and get to their hometown, and they have to comply to this power struggle that's going on. But what is happening beneath the surface? Luke is reminding us of the faithfulness of God. In the midst of chaos and power struggle unraveling at the seams and all that's going on, Luke is reminding us beneath the surface, he's reminding us of the faithfulness of God. That God is a God who stands above everything else. And he's able to orchestrate things for his purposes. For he has made a promise, and he is faithful to his promise. Long ago, God had made a promise that a Messiah would come. That while you are an occupied people, while you may not have political strength or clout or power, there will be a Messiah that comes that invites you into an eternal kind of kingdom, a kingdom that is ongoing and life-giving and always bursting forth in the goodness. And this Messiah would come, and that Messiah would be born. The prophets said hundreds and thousands of years ago that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And so, there's a census that happens. And there's chaos that happens on the surface. But underneath the surface, Luke is reminding us that in the world that is unraveling, there's a God who is still in control. And there's a God who's faithful to his promises. So what the Christmas narrative reminds us of is that God is faithful to his promises. That God, even in the midst of chaos, and even in the midst of confusion, he is still able to work good things for his desired purposes. And that's a good reminder, not only for those when Jesus was born, but it's a good reminder for us. Because our world can seem chaotic, confusing, and disorder. But God is faithful to his promises. And he is indeed able to work behind the scenes even to bring about his good, his purposes in our life. So what are the purposes? What are the promises of God? Well, he promises that his plans are for the good. For us, his plans for us and for the world are for the good. He promises that he will not leave us by ourselves to navigate this world by ourselves without hope. He promises that for those who love and submit and orient their life around him, he promises a heavenly, eternal kingdom that we can experience now and look forward to for the rest of eternity. And he is faithful to his promises. For the Christmas narrative reminds us the birth of Jesus, and amongst all the chaos and the confusion and the anger that is swirling around, he is trustworthy to his promises. So the first truth that it reminds us of, that I want to remind you of, is God is faithful to his promise. But the second truth that I want to remind you of is that the life with God is a gift of fulfillment, of satisfaction to our souls. Jesus, at one point in his ministry, is meeting with a woman who goes to a well looking for some water. She's thirsty, so she's gathering water to bring back to her home. And she has a conversation with Jesus, and to which he tells her that he would give her an eternal spring of water, that she would never be thirsty again. He can satisfy her soul like nothing else. Later, he would call himself the bread of life. And thereby, when we get our nourishment from him, that our souls would be satisfied, that they would get the fulfillment only through him, that he would bring a satisfying fulfillment kind of life. Angels would tell the shepherds of the birth of Jesus. They would tell the shepherds that they would find the baby wrapped in cloth, lying in a manger, in a feeding trough, where food for animals would have been, straw would have been there. God's gift of grace that brings satisfaction and fulfillment to our souls would be lying in a feeding trough with straw for animals. And it reminds me that while the straw and the animal food that would have been there would have been good for the animals, it would have sustained them. It would not be good for us. I'm not sure if you all saw those, or if you've ever seen those TV shows, the Survivor type things, like Man versus Wild kind of things, where you're dropped off in some remote place and you have no way of getting any food. You just kind of forage for whatever you can. And if you watch the shows as they progress, no matter which one it is, as they progress, the people begin to be okay, but then you begin to see the wear and tear that malnourishment happens in their physical bodies. Their mind begins to be tired. Their physical body begins to get tired. They have headaches. They begin to see the ramifications of malnourishment to their bodies. That's what happens when you withhold nourishment from your bodies, but the same could be said when you withhold nourishment from our souls. For our souls need to be nourished, and this way in which our souls get nourished is by being unified with God. In a life unified with God, we have nourishment to our soul. And when we're separated because of sin and rebellion and our old ways, then our souls are shrunk and they're lacking. We feel like our souls need something more. And so we strive after one thing or another. The problem is everything we strive after is like striving after straw for the animals. Every option that the world provides us that's going to try and give us nourishment and satisfaction for our souls is nothing more than just straw to give us one more day. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by this world offers us straw? Anything that tries to cover up the need for our souls by just a small little bit amount, but it will always leave us malnourished, always leave us longing for something more. There's all sorts of variations of this that the world offers us, and they will always leave us malnourished and never satisfied, never fulfilled, never delivering on their promises. And it's easy to think of the big ones. We've always talked about the big ones of consumerism, of money and success, drugs and alcohol, and all these things that people strive for, but it's like eating straw. It never satisfies the longing in our soul. Some people run to relationships to find that satisfaction in there. They think they will never be complete unless they have that one relationship. That one person will finally fulfill them and it finally brings satisfaction to their souls. But you know how it goes. You start up a new relationship, and at first it's this ideal thing and everything is great. And quickly that ideal turns to an ordeal, and pretty soon you want a new deal and you just move on to the next thing. Right? You know how it is. Never bringing satisfaction to our souls. There's this longing, and we're eating on straw when all along the Messiah, the only one that can bring true satisfaction to our souls, is lying in a manger, waiting for us to say yes to Him. Each of us struggle with our own variation of straw, pursuing significance by what we do or by what other people think about us or by what we can accomplish. But all of those things always overpromise and underdeliver. And it is only in the Christmas narrative that we are reminded that it is only Jesus, the gift of God's grace, that brings satisfaction, fulfillment to our souls. It's only in Christ to fulfill us in ways that nothing else can. One more piece of truth that I want to be reminded of, and that is that grace comes into our messes. Grace comes into our messes. As we heard in the monologue little drama just a second ago, this manger scene, this stable scene was a mess. Stinky. Animals and animal droppings were all around this little stable. I mean, our nativity scenes that we put on a mantle are pristine and polished and look all nice and everyone's hair is in the right place and everything else. But the situation that Jesus was born into was anything like that. Anything but pretty. It was messy, it was dirty, it was stinky. And if we're honest, in many ways our lives are messy and broken and stinky. It's not just the world out there that's messed up and broken and stinky, but often our lives are messy and broken and stinky. We have broken relationships in our life. We have out of control egos and struggle with pride and arrogance. We are habitual liars at times. We struggle with unforgiveness in our own hearts. Friends, we're a mess. You and I, and the human condition is a mess. But the extraordinary news of Christmas, the one who is swaddled in clothes and lie down in a manger, is that no mess is too messy for the love of God. No mess is too messy for Jesus to be willing to step into it. He is not deterred by how messy your life is, by how screwed up you have gone, by how off the rails you have gone. God is not deterred from the stench of our life, for He stepped into it in the manger and the stable. Now, it will take an intentional effort to say yes, to accept this gift of grace, to follow the ways of Jesus, that's for sure. But the Christmas narrative reminds us that no mess is too messy for the love of God to step into and transform it from the inside out. No life is too messy for God to come and dwell with us. That's the beautiful story of Christmas. That's the good news of life with God. So this Christmas, among all the wrapping of presents and ornaments and lights and everything else, would you be reminded that God is faithful to His promises, that God is one who can come into your life and bring fulfillment like nobody else can? And would you be reminded that your mess is not too messy for the love of God? You are not too far gone for the love of God. You've not struggled too much for the love of God. Many of you I know, and many of you I know this. But I pray in this Christmas season, you would know it one step further. That you would know it one step deeper than what you've already known. We light candles at Christmas. We light the Advent wreath, which will remind us that in the midst of the darkness in our world, in the midst of the darkness in my own life, that light has come. And that one light changes everything. All of history changes in light of Jesus' coming, the advent of our Messiah, who's faithful to His promise, giving fulfillment and satisfaction to our souls, and will lead us to a fulfilled life when we say yes. And we orient and transform our life around Him, around His teaching.